Lethality and armor penetration are commonly bought in order to reduce the target's armor. But how do they work? How do I know when to buy what? Furthermore, if I'm a tank and I see lots of armor penetration / lethality, do I buy more armor or more health? Before we answer these questions, we first have to know how armor works and then look at all the different types of ways to reduce armor. To understand how armor works, be sure to watch my previous video, How Does the Armor System Work in League / TFT? If you are caught up on damage reduction and effective health, there's only one slightly less important concept pertaining to armor before we begin. Armor is split into base and bonus armor. Base armor is armor that increases through a champion's leveling. Bonus armor is armor from all other sources, like from items. Now to begin, there are 4/5 ways to reduce armor. Furthermore, there's an order to which way one gets applied first. First, we have flat armor reduction. Flat armor reduction reduces a target's armor by a specific amount. Flat armor reduction is distributed properly between base and bonus armor. If there are more than one source of flat armor reduction, they will just simply add. Flat armor reduction is usually a debuff, meaning the whole enemy team has access to that reduced armor. If there is enough flat armor reduction, the target's armor will be negative, after which there will be no further calculations done. Shown on screen are champions with flat armor reduction. The next step is percent armor reduction. Percent armor reduction reduces both base and bonus armor by 1 minus the specified amount. For example, if a target has 100 armor, 10% armor reduction results in the target having 90 armor. Once again, armor reduction is a debuff, so damage amplification gain when damaging the champion is global. If there are more than one source of percent armor reduction, they will stack multiplicatively. Stacking multiplicatively in League terms means source 1 plus source 2 minus the product of source 1 and source 2. Shown on screen are champion abilities and items with percent armor reduction. The third one is percent armor penetration. Percent armor penetration reduces both base and bonus armor by 1 minus the specified amount. However, armor penetration is not a debuff. The only champion that gains the advantage is the one with armor penetration, and this will stack multiplicatively. Shown on screen are champion abilities and items with percent armor penetration. The fourth one is bonus percent armor penetration. The only difference between regular armor penetration and bonus percent armor penetration is that bonus percent armor penetration only works on bonus armor. If a champion does not have bonus armor, then bonus percent armor penetration is useless. The fifth and final one is lethality, or flat armor penetration. The target's armor is reduced by a specified amount, and lethality is distributed properly between base and bonus armor. If there are more than one source of flat armor penetration, they will just simply add, and this can't reduce the target's armor to below 0. The only champion that gains the advantage is the one with lethality. Shown on screen are champion abilities and items with flat armor penetration. As of right now, in League of Legends, you can't gain flat armor reduction from any items. Black Cleaver is the only item in the game that gives percent armor reduction. For armor penetration, you can only buy one fatality item at a time. For example, you can't buy Terminus and Shirelia's Grudge at the same time. There are many lethality items in the game, more than you can possibly buy. And to recap, there are 4 main ways to reduce armor. You can split them up into armor reduction or armor penetration. Armor reduction is a debuff that allows your whole team to deal more damage to that target. Armor penetration is a stat that only allows you to remove their armor during the damage calculation phase. Then you can split ways to reduce armor into flat versus pen. Flat removes a specific amount and stacks additively. Percentage removes a portion of their armor and stacks multiplicatively. Finally, there are ways to reduce armor that solely focus on base/bonus armor, and they don't occur that often. I previously said percent armor reduction and percent armor penetration stack multiplicatively, but what does this mean? Let's start with an example. If I have 100 armor and 2 sources of percent armor reduction applied onto me, one at 10% and one at 20%, my armor will show 100 times 1 minus 0.1 times 1 minus 0.2, which is 78 armor. The net percent armor reduction is given by the following equation. Armor reduction net is equal to source 1 plus source 2 minus the product of source 1 and source 2, or in this example, 0.1 plus 0.2 minus the product of 0.1 and 0.2, which is equal to 0.28. So overall, the percent armor reduction is 28%. Looking at the stacking multiplication equation more closely, it differs from the stacking additive equation by source 1 times source 2. This term showcases the inefficiency of having multiple sources of the same stat that stack multiplicatively. For two sources, if we keep one source constant and one variable, the result is a linear curve. And if we compare this to the additive stacking, we can see that the additive stacking is always above the multiplication line, except at one point, and that is when the other source gives a value of 0, or in other words, you don't buy a second source. But if you have multiple sources, there will be an inefficiency associated with it. The larger the sources, the bigger discrepancy between the two curves, aka the bigger the deficiency. Something to take note of is that regardless of what value the first source has, if you want to get rid of 100% a target's armor from either armor reduction or armor penetration, the second source has to have a value of 100%. And we can see this by looking at the multiplication stacking equation for two sources. So we have source 1 plus source 2 minus the product of source 1 and source 2, which is then equal to source 1 plus 1 minus source 1 times the second source. If the second source is equal to 1, then we get source 1 plus 1 minus the first source is equal to 1. So if I completely want to remove their armor from two sources, one of them has to be 100%. And if that's the case, there's no point in having that other source to begin with, since you would just buy the 100% one. And this is true for any number of sources. And looking at the equation down below, we have enemy armor times 1 minus source 1 times 1 minus source 2 times 1 minus source 3, etc. And we want this to be equal to 0. Then at least one of 1 minus a source has to be equal to 0, so some source is equal to 1. To decide when you want multiple sources of a stat/debuff which stacks multiplicatively, you have to look at the whole picture. What else do you gain by having that source? And what are you missing out on by having that source? Moving on, we can think of reducing armor as increasing damage amplification. Reducing armor lowers the amount of damage mitigation that the enemy champion has. We can calculate the damage amp from the following equation. Percent damage increase is equal to 100 plus original armor divided by, in parentheses, 100 plus reduced armor. So, how much more damage would I do if I had armor pen? And the table on screen shows damage amplification for two levels of armor penetration at various armor levels. And we can see that as armor increases, armor penetration is more effective. Now, let's look at damage percent increase at different lethality values. As armor increases, the damage increase from lethality becomes smaller, which is the opposite effect as armor penetration. At high armor ranges and high lethality, lethality becomes even more effective. As you increase lethality, the rate of change for damage amp per lethality increases. This means the same increase of lethality results in bigger damage amplification at high levels compared to at low levels. Now let's look at something interesting. Let's take our 30% armor penetration and use it in the equation from before. We get the following equation. Percent damage increase is equal to 100 plus original armor divided by 100 plus 0.7 times original armor. If we take this limit as armor goes to infinity, the equation is equal to original armor divided by 0.7 times original armor, which is then equal to 1 divided by 0.7, or 1.428. So at super high armor values, the damage amp will always be 1.428 for 30% armor pen. And this is the max cap. And the percent damage increase will never be greater than this for all positive armor values. And we can do the same thing for Last Whisper, which gives 18% armor penetration and has a max cap of 1.21. Now let's do the same thing for lethality. percent damage increase is equal to 100 plus original armor divided by, in parentheses, 100 plus original armor minus lethality. If we take the limit as armor goes to infinity, the equation is equal to original armor divided by original armor, which is just 1. And this makes sense, as damage from lethality decreases as armor increases, and when the lethality value stays the same. And now to answer some questions you may have. Question 1. At what armor ranges is armor penetration better than lethality? For most champs, your concern should be when to buy armor penetration versus lethality, since you can't buy flat armor reduction, and there's only one item in the game with percent armor reduction. For my previous video, you should know that effective health is a great measure to determine how tanky someone is. Reducing armor lowers the effective HP on a target. The goal is to reduce effective HP as much as possible. Legendary lethality items usually give 18 lethality, except opportunity at 26 if out of combat, while 15 while in combat. Lord Dom's gives 35% armor penetration, while Australia's Grudge gives 30% armor penetration. So let's find the armor amounts where effective HP is equal. And here is a table with our 4 comparisons. We are only comparing the lethality and penetration values. This table is only based on armor penetration and lethality, and the opponent's effective health. All other stats will be voided. So, Opportunity versus Grudge, the armor value is 90. Opportunity versus Dom, the armor value is 77. 18 lethality versus Grudge, the armor value is 60. While 18 lethality versus Dom, the armor value is 51. So, armor value is greater than the number shown means that penetration is better, whereas the value is lower means lethality is better. The higher lethality you have means more armor is needed on the enemy champ before penetration is better. A higher pen means less armor is needed before penetration is better than lethality. At high armor values, penetration is better. At low armor values, lethality is better. Now here's question 2. If I already build lethality, do I build more lethality or switch over to pen? And to answer this question, we construct a simple model. Assume a champion has 6 item slots. The champion can then either buy all lethality items or 1 penetration item, and the rest are lethality items. A lethality item generally gives around 18 lethality, and we'll assume that the penetration item has 30% armor penetration. At what armor ranges is lethality better? What about penetration? How about for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 item slots? And shown below are 6 graphs, one for each number of item slots. And each graph has 2 curves, one showcasing damage amp compared to armor with all lethality items, and the other curve is showcasing damage amp compared to armor with 1 penetration item and the rest being lethality. We can see that for 4, 5, and 6 items, 1 pen rest lethality is just as good at low armor values and better at high armor values. For 3, 2, 1 item slots, there are some regions where all lethality is better than 1 pen rest lethality. And looking at the table, we can see that for 3 item slots, all lethality is better at 51 armor to 60 armor. For 2 item slots, all lethality is better at 25.7 armor to 60 armor. For 1 item slot, all lethality is better at 0 to 60 armor. So, as the number of item slot increases, the range where all lethality items is better slowly shrinks until it is never better. At 4 plus item slots, you should have 1 penetration item. At 2 and 3 item slots, it depends on the armor range of the enemy champions. If the armor range is between the corresponding amounts, you may be better with all lethality. A reminder, I'm only comparing lethality and armor penetration. Every item has their own stats, costs, and effects that are not being factored in here. Question 3. When should I buy percent armor reduction? The biggest advantage of percent armor reduction is that it is a debuff. Your whole team has access to its benefits. However, it can't be easily applied to multiple champions at once. If a champion is relying on a teammate to apply percent armor reduction, there's a risk of not being able to fully utilize the full benefits. That being said, the best time to buy percent armor reduction is when you have strong attack damage carries and that the enemy champion is stacking armor. The ideal scenario is that the champion with percent armor reduction stacks on champion and all the attack damage carries target that enemy champion. This essentially opens up an item slot on the attack damage carries so that they don't have to build armor penetration if the teammate with percent armor reduction is reliable. If a teammate did want to build percent armor penetration, they can, but percent armor reduction and percent armor penetration stack multiplicatively. This means there will be some inefficiency. You have multiple sources of percent armor reduction and percent armor penetration. However, if a champion buys Black Cleaver and Grudge, the combined effects will reduce armor by 51%, and this is when Black Cleaver is at max stacks. Below are some graphs that show the damage amp versus armor when you have a single way to reduce armor or you have two ways to reduce armor. We can see that damage amp grows pretty considerably at 51% reduced armor compared to 30% reduced armor. However, for both curves, you see that the value slowly approaches a constant. And this constant, like we previously mentioned, is 1 divided by 1 over the armor percent / armor reduction value. And this constant isn't too important. It just means that the damage amp you're gaining will never be greater than the constant. And now for question 4. If my champion already has an ability that reduces armor, should I run more? And this question is similar to question 3. To showcase the difference, we'll be comparing J4's level 1 Q of 10% armor reduction and Trundle's 40% armor reduction from Czar to no armor reduction. This scenario will be similar to the previous example where you can buy 1 up to 6 items. You may buy a 30% armor penetration item or 30% armor reduction item, and the rest of the item slots are lethality items. For the 1 item case, we can see that as the armor reduction from our champion's ability increases, the range of where lethality is better increases as well. With 2+ items, we can see that the range slowly shifts right and gets bigger for each case. And if you already had an ability that reduces armor, even more armor is needed to justify the percent way to reduce armor, compared to if you didn't have that way to reduce armor. And now for question 5. Do I buy more armor or more health if there's armor pen? So, reducing armor means reducing a champion's effective HP, and so we can use our equation from the previous video. Effective HP is equal to health times, in parentheses, 1 plus armor divided by 100. And so, after reducing armor, our reduced effective HP is equal to health times 1 plus, in parentheses, armor minus the armor reduced divided by 100. And so the difference in effective HP is equal to health times armor reduced divided by 100. And the percent change in effective HP is equal to 100 plus reduced armor divided by 100 plus original armor. And so our goal when buying tanky items is that our effective HP increase from health and armor should be as close as possible. If you can expect armor to be lowered the majority time of the game, which is a percent decrease, you have to factor that in when deciding buying armor versus health. For example, if I have 1000 health and 100 armor, and the enemy champion has 30% armor penetration, my effective health when I don't fight that champion is 2000, and to that champion with the pen, it is 1700. And what if I have the choice to buy either 30 armor or 150 health? What should I do? In this scenario, it's either ruby crystals or 2 cloth armors, and they result in the same effective HP without armor penetration. However, with an armor penetration source, buying 2 cloth armors is worse than buying health. The effective HP increase from buying health is 15%, and the effective HP from buying armor went from 50% to 12%. And to match them is buy even more armor than you would usually do. And to get back to the effective HP percent increase, you have to buy 36 armor instead of 30 armor. So in some cases, the percent increase from armor has been lowered enough where buying more health is more favorable. But when the growth in effective HP from health slows down, that is exactly when you should buy more armor. This question is similar to the previous one. While lethality gets rid of armor, it doesn't lower the percent increase of buying armor. And using a similar example as the previous one, if I had 1000 health and 130 armor, and an enemy champion has 30 lethality, should I buy 150 health or 30 armor? In this scenario, due to lethality, buying 2 armor cloths is better than buying 1 ruby crystal. The percent increase in effective HP from buying a ruby crystal is constant at 15%. However, the percent increase in effective HP from buying 2 armor cloths went from 15% to 17%. Notice the contrast from the previous example. Because lethality is a flat value, it doesn't have the armor pen effect where buying an additional 30 armor becomes less effective. Once again, you have to keep in mind the rate at which armor and health are going. The percent increase from both should be as close as possible. Baron and Atakhan have been known to reduce a target's armor and magic resistance, but by how much? Baron Nashor has a passive called the Aura of Destruction, which spreads the debuff Void Corruption to any units hit by his abilities and attacks. Void Corruption stacks up to 100 and lasts up to 8 seconds, and each stack reduces armor and magic resistance by 0.5. At max stacks, Baron reduces a target's armor and MR by 50, and all debuffs are removed 4.5 seconds after he's killed. Atakhan has a similar passive called Frail and Unworthy. The passive applies the debuff Frail and Unworthy to enemies hit by his abilities and attacks. Frail and Unworthy stacks up to 50, and each stack reduces armor and magic resistance by 1. So just like Baron, Atakhan reduces a target's armor and MR by 50. One thing to note about Atakhan is that the debuff is removed on his death, and both Atakhan and Baron's debuffs are a form of flat armor reduction. So, if the enemy team is trying to do Baron or Atakhan, you should stall them until they have max stacks on them and then engage. For both epic monsters, you should try to fight them while the monster is still alive. If the monster is still alive, you have a longer opportunity to take advantage of the debuffs, which are 8 seconds for Baron and 4 seconds for Atakhan. However, after Baron falls, you have a 4.5 second window where you can take advantage of the debuffs. And for Atakhan, there is no window after. In conclusion, knowing the ranges for the enemy champion's armor is essential to determine when to add in a reduced armoring source. There was a lot to cover, but I hope you have enjoyed this video and it gave you some key insights on your decision making. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe down below. See you in the next video.